Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Tuesday Tips. I'm your host, Marin Smith. I'm the Senior Content Strategist here at Grow Schools. So as usual, we're here on Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern for 10 minutes discussing the biggest challenges facing school leaders. And this week, we're delighted to welcome back Sarah Fink for a continuation of our discussion from our recent webinar, AI in Your School. And we've got a couple of follow-up questions to kick things off with Sarah, but of course, as always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to pop them into that chat. Sarah, you shared so many great tips during the webinar, and one thing that stood out to me is this balance that schools have to strike between excitement over AI adoption and all the exciting tools that they can start integrating, but also being sure that they're doing so ethically and safely. So my first question for you is how schools can ensure that their AI policies include those ethical considerations, and what are some of the top things that school leaders can think about as they're doing that?
That's such a great question. And I know that it's not a one size fits all. Every school is different. Every community is different. And so I think the number one thing that I would say is engage with the people in your community, give them a voice, a seat at the table. Don't do it behind closed doors when you're developing that policy. A key piece of ethical and responsible AI is transparency. So practice that transparency in developing your policy so that everyone feels like they have a voice, right? From each and every student to parents to faculty and staff. It really is an opportunity to bring people together and let them be heard. We may not be able to solve for all of the problems and all of the fears that come up, but I think that forum of transparency and communication is just the best starting point. From there, I think the key is to find a good partner. We know that schools and school districts and charter schools, you guys are not experts in AI, and no one expects you to be, and parents shouldn't expect you to be either. That's why AI literacy is so important. So go do your homework, read, find partners, find thought leaders and subject matter experts that you can lean on, that you trust, and also give them some space to have a voice, especially as you're building tools and evaluating tools and technology. That's going to be really important because sometimes you just don't know what you don't know and what questions to ask. So finding some experts to help you formulate those key check boxes, all the things that have to happen before you adopt a policy or adopt a new technology, that those experts are going to be key.
Yeah, so that's great. Those are great tips. And one of the things I remember you mentioning is that when it comes to transparency, that policy should live in a place where it can be seen, right? Like it should be out in the open, and it's something that should be continually revised, because the tricky thing about AI is that it's changing in front of our eyes every day, right?
Yeah.
And so, educators, as we're kind of that expression about building the plane as you're flying the plane, right? Like what's the best way that educators and school leaders can stay informed? Do you have any tips or channels they can tune into, or recommendations for that continual improvement of policy and ethics as AI evolves?
Yeah, I really loved meeting Corey from AI for Education. I thought that they are a fantastic organization, and there's probably a handful of others who are committed to the education industry, but are also focusing a lot of their efforts on understanding the tools that are available and making them tangible and useful for educators and for students. So I think that's a really great place to start. There's a lot of noise, no doubt about it. And it's all over your news stations and social media. There's a lot of, I don't necessarily want to say controversy, but certainly, there's a lot of ups and downs happening in the industry. And so, finding again that partner like AI for Education or others that are doing that, I think are really great. And then, like you said, maybe changing that policy or putting some dates in that policy to go back and revise it. It's hard, right? I mean, I've talked to schools where they even trying to update their handbook every year for the new incoming classes, and any kind of policy changes is a ton of work. But this one is one that I think will be worthwhile. And I love what you said, is to put that policy someplace where people will see it. So in that handbook or on your website, send it out in an email. Yeah, don't hide it. But you're also, don't feel the pressure to adopt all things AI right now either. It's okay. It's okay to go slow, right? Because it is changing. So it's give yourself the space to temper your policies with what the community, again, is really comfortable with at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that you touched on what Corey shared. And one of the things AI for Education suggested is, even for educators, it's okay if you're not the expert and, they're learning how to use generative AI, for example, in the classroom alongside their students, and they're learning about the ethics alongside their students. And you're kind of touching on that same point, that it's okay not to be an expert. And that's where, relying on, trusted sources of that information really comes in. So yeah, I love that. And when we're talking about the policy, and I know as a part of the webinar, you offered school leaders this awesome template to help them get started, because that can be a source of overwhelm. Is, okay, I have to draft this policy and get it approved by the board and make sure it is distributed and updated. Is there anything that stands out to you that is like, should definitely be included in that policy? Just key tips that school leaders can make sure they have as they put that together.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest one is going to be around privacy and data protection. We talk about that a lot in my everyday role at Bast AI, and I know that cybersecurity is also a really big deal when it comes to some of these new systems. So, schools, and I mean, I work mostly in higher ed these days, but in general, school districts and schools, they don't necessarily have the most sophisticated networks. So, and certainly not a lot of resources to be able to ensure that you have the right technology to protect those networks. But when you open the door to things like generative AI on your network, it's super important to make sure that the students are safe and that their data is safe, as well as, and the faculty. So taking another look at your technology infrastructure before you introduce some of these tools is going to be super important to ensure that that data protection is there. A lot of tools today, in fact, OpenAI just published a new update where they're making ChatGPT free. Like, you actually don't need to create a login anymore to do that. Wow. And it seems like it would be really great, but as part of that, there's an implicit permission that you give them to access every conversation that you have in that chat window. So it's a lot of the way that social media operates, where you have to opt out, right? You're automatically opted in. So do take a look at that when you're looking at tools, to make sure that that data stays on your campus, that stays in your building, and is protected, and those students and their data is protected. You have to do that by law. FERPA requires that. So there may be some extra resources you need to tap into to ensure that that happens before you bring any new tools into your ecosystem. The other big piece is that student and educator training. So, be proactive. Maybe it's some free training. You invite parents. I think, Corey said this too, parents and teachers learning alongside their students. It's a really great opportunity to build bonds and trust and connection. And I think, formalizing that in your policy could be really fun. So bringing in maybe an AI literacy expert, the do's and don'ts, those kinds of fun things, I think could be a really great way to create an open community around AI and how that's used. The last one, I think, is just the accountability measures. So what does that mean? It just means that what are we looking for from an educational goals perspective, right? So a lot of schools are concerned about plagiarism. They're concerned about students using AI rather than using their brain, right? I mean, AI is designed to mimic human intelligence, but its best use is to augment the human, not replace them. That's a motto that we use all the time. So getting really clear about when is the right time and it's okay to use artificial intelligence. Maybe it's at the end of the process rather than at the beginning. Or when is it okay, when is it okay to use it for idea generation or collaboration? There's a lot of social learning opportunities with it. And I think ultimately making sure that that's clear and up for revision, of course, is going to make things a lot easier to keep people connected to that policy and adopt that policy.
Yeah. Great insights, and also understanding, what you input into Gen AI is important, and understanding here's what is okay to put input and here's what's not, especially for students, which goes back to that technology training, not only for staff, but, also making sure students are aware of those parameters. So really great thoughts there. And Sarah, this has been such a great follow-up conversation, really great tangible tips for school leaders. We like to keep these chats as close to 10 minutes as possible. We're right at the 11-minute mark. So just want to thank you again for your insights in what's just an ever-evolving and exciting, but also, thorny space right now in education. So for more on AI, those of you watching, you can check out the full webinar where Sarah is one of our panelists. It's called AI in Your School. You'll find it on growschools.com. Sarah also has a great article available on our site. It's called Navigating AI Ethics at Your School. And there's a link to that great template that we mentioned in this conversation in that article. You'll find that just right at the top of our library. So we'll be back next week for another episode of Tuesday Tips, where we'll hear from Sangar Safi, who was another one of our panelists, on one of the things you touched on, Sarah, which is security and safety issues associated with AI adoption. So make sure to tune in. And thanks again to Sarah and to everyone who joined us today. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Karen. Bye.